Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. This is episode number 30. It's the midweek episode. Today, we are talking about Inter Miami's roster because the MLS published every single roster with details last week, and there's a lot to talk about. And so we decided, let's just jump on and dedicate a whole hour to it. There'll be some fun stuff. We'll talk about guys that might come in the summer, big names that have been linked to Inter Miami, things like that. And we'll get into a little bit of the nitty gritty on how it's all possible. But before all of that, as always, I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur. How you feeling tonight, man?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Midweek episodes are always fun. This one's going to be slightly technical to begin with because we're going to discuss a lot about the rosters and the and players and where they stand in terms of how this roster has been built. So an interesting conversation ahead. So kick back, relax, take a drink, take some snacks, and yeah, we'll enjoy the rest of the hour.
Yeah, if anyone isn't that familiar with MLS's roster rules, and they are difficult to understand, this is probably going to be an interesting episode to get a little bit of that. But before we do any of that, I do want to talk to you about a couple of Champions League finals that are coming up. Today, we found out that in Europe, it's going to be Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund. Any quick predictions before we talk about the more important Champions League final?
Well, any betting man's going to predict that Real Madrid's going to win this again, right? You never bet against Don Carlo, man. He just needs to raise an eyebrow and they're ready to win. It was a really good semifinals, both ends, I think. Borussia Dortmund and PSG as well. I'm quite surprised that Borussia has made it this far, but they've got a good team. It'll be a fairy tale ending if they manage to beat Real Madrid in the finals, but it's at Wembley as well. I don't think that's going to happen. I am very confident that Real Madrid is going to get the job done, and this is their 18th final. It's just in their pedigree.
Todd, give me your score prediction.
I think it's going to be 2-1 to Real Madrid.
I think it'll be even easier than that. I think it might be 2 or 3-0 for Real Madrid. This Dortmund team doesn't have the level of talent, but over any 90-minute game, anything can happen. More importantly, we also found out last week that Monterrey was eliminated in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinals, and instead the Columbus Crew will go to the finals against Pachuca. And Columbus did the thing that Inter Miami couldn't, and that was go on the road to Monterrey and get not just the result you needed, which all they needed was a draw, because I think they won the first game 2-1, but they actually go and beat them up a little bit and win 3-1. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that, but how much? Maybe we can give a quick score prediction or a prediction for that final. Pachuca versus Columbus. Any quick predictions?
I'm not as familiar with Pachuca as I am with Columbus Crew, so as an MLS fan, as an Inter Miami fan, you obviously want an MLS team to do well. So I'm going to go with a 3-2 victory for Columbus Crew and bring the trophy here. Shut up some of the Mexico fans, A lot of noise is being made.
That game will be in Mexico at Pachuca Stadium. It's a one-off. Unlike over the past several years, there've been a home and home game. This is just a one-off. Columbus has shown they can go to Mexico and get the win, so I won't put it past them. But I do wonder if Pachuca will just get the better of them. I think it could be like 2-2 and they win in penalties or something like that. But we'll see. But the reason I brought it up is because clearly it's possible. Clearly an MLS team can do it. And I don't think that the Columbus Crew are so far and away the best team in MLS that they're the only team that could possibly have done it. And yet they've now reached the final. They beat the team that Inter Miami couldn't beat. They also beat another Liga MX team, if I'm not mistaken. And they did in the previous round.
Tigres, I believe.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Thank you. How frustrating is that for you? Because Inter Miami is in a very unique window here to try and win championships like that, and they didn't get it done in one of their, two chances with Lionel Messi.
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating because obviously it seemed like we are finally coming together as a team, and it felt like all the stars were aligning, especially with the way Messi was playing. But the injuries didn't help, and I think the game came a little bit too soon for my liking. before our team actually started to peak. If this Inter Miami team plays Monterrey today, I think they take them on and they beat them even away from home. So I think it was just not the perfect timing in terms of when we played them, and it just wasn't meant to be. So maybe this year we can go ahead and win some of the other trophies, and next year our focus would be fully and completely on the Champions Cup, because it potentially would be the last chance to win that with Lionel Messi on this team. So maybe that's the fairy tale that we're looking for.
Yeah. We were very bare bones, especially in that second leg against Monterrey. We had a ton of injuries and a suspension, and really we were thin, even though we did get Lionel Messi back for that second leg. But even now, it feels like we have a ton more depth. Robert Taylor's back, Campana, Christoph. Some young guys have sort of established themselves. We brought in Matthias Rojas. Kermaski's actually gotten on the field. And it feels like we're not far away from having a complete team, which brings us to our next topic, which is Jordi Alba, allegedly practicing today with the team, fully ready to go, apparently. And I don't know if we're going to see him Saturday, but he's available, right? He should be, or at least he's on his way back.
Says a lot about our team depth that we haven't really missed him in the last few games. And thank God for Franco Negri coming back from injury when he did, because it could have been the other way around and we would be suffering and potentially seeing someone like Noah Allen in left back, which I don't think he's ready to play games regularly in and out. So really good to have Franco Negri in to fill that slot. I think he's done a fantastic job. He's done exactly what we expected him to do, despite coming back from a decent enough injury. And it'll be great to have Alba back, man. Join the party, because it hasn't felt like he's been away for too long, just by virtue of how many games we've been winning and how we've been winning those games. So I hope it doesn't disturb the team balance, but I think it's just going to get better, right?
Yeah. 3 games without Jordi Alba. We beat Nashville 3-1. We beat New England Revolution 4-1. And then we beat the New York Red Bulls 6-2. So I don't know. It might not get better with Jordi Alba, because that was a pretty outstanding run we just had.
Hey, that 7-2 still pending. I've called
true,
it. It's going to happen once.
I will say, though, it does feel like the defense has been a little bit more solid over the last couple of games. And maybe that's just in my head, and maybe it's because our fullbacks have been staying back a little bit more, especially Cello, but the same with Franco Negri. I do wonder how that's going to change with Jordi Alba, because he's going to bomb forward as often as he can. So I just wonder how that's going to play. Not that Jordi Alba isn't substantially better than Franco Negri, just that the team structure might be a little different from what we've had, and we've gotten great results with this.
Yeah, you say that our defense has looked more solid, yet we've conceded a goal in 40 seconds and then in the first 20 minutes. So it's not all amazing, but I agree with you. It's looked a lot more stable than it has in the first few games of the season. And it looks like everyone started to gel together. And at least the Freire and Aviles combination, I think I'm starting to like it a lot more. Obviously, there are holes there. They're not really good at playing out from the back, but it's the best that we've got at the moment. I do think Jordi Alba coming in might affect Cello's game a little bit, because he won't be the one bombing forward. I think the onus is going to be on Jordi Alba to make that make those offensive moves. So maybe we see a little bit more defensive playing style from Cello, which we have been seeing anyways. So I'm not sure. We'll see how that plays out. It's going to be an interesting transition from Negri to Cello.
Yeah, but I think it's to Alba. Yeah, but I think it's something
Alba, yeah.
to pay attention to, because if Jordi Alba is playing so high up, you become more susceptible. And the goal we did give up against the Red Bulls, it was because Franco Negri was doing this inverted fullback thing, and he was just in the wrong spot. And you can definitely see Jordi Alba being there and kind of leaving the back line, or the back two, out to dry a little bit. But he also probably gives you another 2 goals a game. So, you take the good with the bad. And then lastly, Federico Redondo. We didn't see any pictures. He's not back or anything, but it sounds like there was progress. There was a progress report made today. He's training, not with the team, but doing some individual work in the gym. making his way back. The initial timeline brought him in sort of around the beginning of June. So we still got a couple weeks to go. But again, another positive update for a really exciting player that we didn't actually get to see a lot of.
What we saw of him was very exciting. I think we might have, the more I think about it, the more I feel like we might have built him up a little bit too much in our heads. And when he comes back, he's not as amazing as we're assuming him to be. That's obviously going to be dependent on how he fits back into the team and how much time he takes to get back into playing form. But I do think he's going to add absolutely amazing value to the midfield. I'm tired of seeing Grasso and Ruiz, so it'll be good to see Redondo come in for either Ruiz or Grasso. My suspicions are Ruiz, and he's just going to add a lot more stability to that center of the pitch. So looking forward to it.
If I asked you who's played more minutes this year, Federico Redondo or Franco Negri, who would you guess?
I would say Franco Negri.
It is Franco Negri. We did not get much of Federico Redondo. He played 4 games, only 335 minutes. I mean, that's the same number of games as Benjamin Kramaski, who we want to see more of. And of course, he started and Kramaski hasn't. But it was a very small sample size for us having Federico Redondo. And maybe only one of those games was with Lionel Messi in the lineup. So him being this ultra valuable piece, this guy that we brought in to be a huge difference maker in the midfield, and yet we haven't really seen him with the A team yet, which is, to me, exciting.
Yeah, and he's shown glimpses of how amazing he actually can be, especially in that game against DC. I believe the way he controlled that midfield, his powerful runs through the middle. We don't have that in the midfield right now. We rely a lot on Sergio Busquets to create a lot of the offensive transitions and the opportunities. And it'll be really good to see Redondo with either Matas Rojas or Lionel Messi as well. As you mentioned, he hasn't played much with him. So there's a lot to come from this team, man. There's so much going on in terms of how many players we might get back. Diego Gomez is another potential one that we're going to get back soon. So as long as the rest of the players stay fit, I will be sleeping sound and well once our entire roster is fully fit and healthy to go.
Yeah, we should probably take note and be appreciative of the fact that we've just gotten 12 points from our last 12. And that was without Jordi Alba, Diego Gomez, and Federico Redondo, who are poised to come back in the next month or so. So it's good times, man. Our main topic for tonight is the roster that MLS provided us last week. But anything else that sort of caught your mind before we get into that, just around Inter Miami's world or around the world of the MLS?
Not really, but I do want to address this comment. Rojas and Redondo will be a great midfield. I actually agree with this. They're two very different players, but very complementary.
With Busquets?
With Busquets, this is the perfect midfield balance that I think we're looking for. Diego Gomez is a little bit more of a traditional midfielder, box-to-box 8, and I think he'll be just as suited to a Redondo, Busquets, and Gomez midfield, but Rojas brings in that little bit more spice to his game, I think. So,
well, he's much more of a natural number 10 compared to Gomez, and you can see you could see like a 4-2-3-1 where Redondo and Busquets sit back as dual pivots, and you have Matas Rojas as the 10, and that would be really spicy.
And I think it allows Busquets to play. It allows Busquets to play a 6 and an 8, like a hybrid 6-8. Redondo playing the traditional 6, and then Rojas as the number 10, which would be a fantastic balance for my liking. And I'm really excited to see if that midfield plays together anytime this season.
Okay, let's get into the roster. And I understand that the roster rules in MLS are very confusing. And while I do think I understand them relatively well, I'm still misled frequently. And so if you have any questions while we sort of go over this, and this isn't to you, Saur, this is to anyone in the chat, just put them in the chat and I'll pull them up and answer them, because at least to the best of my ability, because I know it can get confusing, but we're going to try and talk it through, and things that may seem clear to me, at least because I've seen him for the last 5 years might not be that obvious. So if you're confused about anything, just throw it in the chat and we'll answer it. But here is what the MLS provided on Thursday. It is a breakdown of not just Inter Miami, but every team in the MLS. The senior roster, the supplemental roster, the U22 initiative players, the DPs, the international roster slots, et cetera, et cetera. And the closer you look at this, the more there is to really be interested by. And we decided we could put a whole show on just this roster. The first thing that I think is worth noting that we haven't heard a lot of, and I haven't seen a lot of talk about this on Twitter or online really, is who is a TAM player for this team. And what this means is that they are one of the highest paid players on the team below the DP threshold. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the DP threshold, which means you can have 3 players above, making substantial money, which is how we can afford Lionel Messi without it just destroying our cap. But TAM players allows you to have a few other expensive players that are not quite that level, but still valuable and still making significant money. And like you'd expect, you see Jordi Alba on that list. You see Luis Suarez on that list. It's the other 3 players that are labeled as TAM players that caught my eye, and that's Nico Frede, Sergei Christoph, and Julian Gressel. And these 3 players, you wouldn't expect to be 3 of the highest paid players on the team, and yet they are. And I think it tells us a little bit about how this roster was constructed and why we see some of the decisions being made that are being made. Should we start with Julian Gressel? He was a free agent this year. He spent last season half of it with the Columbus Crew and half of it with the Vancouver Whitecaps. And he decided to join Inter Miami instead of the New England Revolution, which is where his spouse is from, that area, because he wanted to team up with Tata Martino again and because he wanted to go out and try and win championships with this team. And now we're finding out that he's making a significant amount of money for this team, from this team, which is fine, and he probably deserves that based on his career in MLS. But it also hamstrings us a little bit, and it tells us how valuable Inter Miami and maybe specifically Tata Martino thought this player was when they went out and got him.
Yeah, I think it just confirms the fact that Julian Gressel is really valuable to Tata Martino, and it essentially shows that they went out and did everything that they could to bring him in, which is not surprising to say the least, but the way that his performances have been, you're left wondering whether he is really a TAM value player. And I think in the grand scheme of things, over the course of the season, maybe he proves his worth. But as of now, it just feels like this might be an expensive buy for us.
It does feel like an expensive buy, and I want to go back to January when we signed him, because it did feel like at least the following 6 weeks felt like Tata Martino really wanted to do a 3-5-2, and that perhaps Julian Gressel is the perfect player to be that right wing back. And yet he doesn't seem to fit in as well. I think this does illustrate why we see him play game after game. They want to make sure that they are playing the players that they paid to play the most. And yet now he's stuck as mostly a midfielder on a team that has a ton of midfield options, and not just options, but really high quality options. I don't know what does this say to you, and what does this mean?
I think the most immediate thing that comes to my mind is football is a lot more than just picking the right players and picking the right squad and letting them play out. I think there are a lot of backroom decisions that come into play, a lot of business decisions that come into play. And a lot of the times we don't recognize how hamstrung managers can actually be by certain business decisions that are taken by the management team. I'm not saying this is entirely one of them, because I'm quite sure that this was a player that Tata Martino really wanted to bring in, and he potentially told Chris Henderson that do whatever you can, just bring him in. So that's one of the reasons why we see Julian Gressel as a TAM player. Second thing I want to say is that these business decisions and how much a team pays for a player and how much a player is being paid in terms of salary. Of course, some of it comes down to negotiations and what the player wants, but you can't necessarily hold that against Julian Gressel. If his performances were really, really good in the last few games, we would have been like, yeah, he's 100% worth a TAM spot. So it's a bit of a hit and a miss in this case. And right now we're saying that he's not worth being a TAM player, but this could have been a completely different conversation if his performances on the pitch would have reflected his value in terms of money. That being said, I think overall, I personally do not think this was a very smart decision from the management team.
It's understood, and maybe this isn't true, but there's a general sense that he took a discount to come play for Inter Miami as opposed to New England, which was the other team that was really chasing him. And you think about the New England team that we saw a week and a half ago, and they could really use a creator like Julian Gressel, and you can see how they would have spent a lot of roster resources on a player that can create like him, especially on that, that right side. And so it's just curious how he fits into the team and how much they spent on him to bring him in. And he's on a long contract, right? You can see right there, it's a 3-year contract and with an option for a 4th. So he's not a guy that's on a 1-year deal, and you can see if it works out or not.
Here's a question though. Do you think Tata eventually comes to a realization that maybe Julian Gressel is surplus to requirements and not necessarily fitting in this team, and we potentially see him go out in the summer? Do you think that's a potential that can happen, given that he's on a 3-year contract and it's expensive?
If you're New England, would you take him right now?
Considering what their team really is, I would.
Because again,
he's still a really good player in a very good team.
He's on a cheaper contract than you were offering him 5 months ago. And you're a team that needs just high quality players, especially Caleb Porter, who's a new coach there. He needs to bring in talent to not get fired, right? So, I mean, it feels like that's still on the table, and it was an option he was seriously considering. So I would say it's probably an option, especially if, and we'll talk about flexibility in a little bit, but if Inter Miami decides, maybe Julian Gressel for the next 3 years isn't what we want, they might try and pull the plug early. I don't really know what the relationship is with Julian and Tata and the front office. So they might have an excellent relationship, and that might be ludicrous to even suggest. So I don't want to speculate on too much, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, I doubt it happens this summer. I think that's too early for Tata to pull the plug on him, because I think this is one of his personal decisions and choices in terms of the players that he wanted to bring in. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. This conversation could be completely different by the end of the season. For all we know, Gressel finds a really good patch of form and finds a role in this team. And I would want nothing more than that, honestly. I just want a player to succeed while he's wearing that Inter Miami shirt. So hopefully he proves his worth and his value. But we'll see.
Yeah. And listen, we will find out exactly how much he makes later on in the season, probably towards the very end, just like we do every year with the MLSPA publishing that information. And he might be just above the threshold, and it might be overblown what we're talking about. But if he's a guy making $1.5 million, that's a lot of money for what you're getting from him and how he fits into this team. Speaking of, let's talk about Nico Frede. Also a TAM player, also a guy that could be making upwards of $1 million, which would only be surpassed by, the big four, and potentially Gressel, and that's it, right? He could be the 5th highest paid player on this team. I think this shows us that he was brought in to be the number 1 center back, and that when they brought him in, they saw him not just as a Kamal Miller replacement, but as an obvious and easy upgrade on him, because he did cost the international roster slot. He is only on a 1-year deal, so that's helpful. But they invested significantly into this player as well, and they expect him to be the number one guy.
Yeah, this one puts things in a bit of a perspective, right? I did not expect him to be a TAM, so this one's a little bit of a surprise. Another one of those where you're just left wondering whether this was actually worth it. Of course, he's one of our starting centre backs, and he's probably going to be for at least until the summer, but I doubt we're going to bring in another centre back who's going to replace him immediately. We could have done better. We could have definitely done better for the price that we let Kamar Miller go. I think Nico Ferreira was never supposed to be the first choice centre back that we wanted to bring in. We know that he was. I'm forgetting who our first choice centre back was, but we weren't able to close that deal, and I think he was second or third on the list. So, for someone who wasn't our first choice, this is a lot of money that we're paying for him.
And it also, I think, tells you that they don't plan on bringing in a center back again, right? And they may be forced to, and we'll talk about that. But clearly, when they brought this guy in, they thought this is the answer, this is the solution, and he's been better. He's been solid in recent weeks. So I don't want to say it was a disaster, but I thought that was interesting and worth noting when we got this roster.
I will say this. Given how much firepower we have in our front three and then our midfield as well, with some of our players coming back from injury, the defense always feels sort of like the forgotten cousin, because there are no, apart from Jordi Alba, if you just look at the centre-back depth, we don't have any outright superstars in there. And that's possibly why we think that Freire and Christoph and Aviles aren't amazing, and our defenses obviously has been conceding a lot of goals. But in the grand scheme of things, they've been doing okay. And yes, we've been bailed out by our offense a lot of the times this season, but the stability has been getting better and better. And I like certain things that these players do. It's just unfortunate that Tata wants them to play from the back, because none of them are capable of doing that, at least at this point in time in their careers. So they're going to have to adapt and learn to a different style and learn new skills that they're not really used to. So it's harsh to judge them so quickly and judge them so harshly. But yeah, like, Freire is a good player, but I'm not sure if he's worth the TAM spot, especially now that you consider Christoph, who we're going to talk about next as well. So interesting decision.
Yeah, and listen, they spent $7 million on Aviles last summer, so they expect him to be a star-level center back, at least to develop into one. And they're paying Freire to be a locked-in center back. And those were decisions made by Tata Martino and, with Chris Henderson. But these are the two guys that he said, these can be my two pair, right? My pair of two center backs. The third guy that we can talk about is Sergei Christoph. He was signed before last season under Phil Neville, a different regime, different circumstances. He wasn't a TAM player last season, and he is this season. And so that, I thought, really, perked my eyebrows. His contract must have gone up from year one to year two. And that's probably why he's still on this team, because he was going to be really difficult to get rid of based on being such an expensive player. It was going to be tough to trade him within the league. And he's making more than even we thought he was going to be over the winter, right?
Yeah, this one's the worst of the lot, I think. This one really hits the nail on the coffin. Not impressed by Christoph by any means. I think he's a good utility centre back that we can use as a good backup when Freire or Aviles are injured. Of course, he's experienced. How old is he? 33, 34. He's slow, not a traditionally fast centre back, but he can do the job. Intelligent, works well. But again, why would you want to increase somebody's salary if you're not even going to play him as your first choice?
Well, again, this was a decision made a long time ago in Inter Miami years, right? It was made under Phil Neville last season. This was pre-Messi, pre all of that. And this was a guy with a lot of Champions League experience with Shakhtar Donetsk. So I don't want to hate on the decision to bring him in. I just think it's worth pointing out, because this is probably why it was so hard to move him in the winter, and probably why he's still on the team. And listen, Kristoff's a good center back. He just doesn't fit a high line play out of the back. He's actually pretty good on the ball, but he doesn't fit a high line team like what Tata Martino brought in and what you really have to do with Lionel Messi. So he's just a bad fit that Inter Miami is now kind of stuck with his contract because he's making so much that no one else wants to bring on that contract, even if they would like to bring on the player.
I think in summary, it's all three of these players that we've highlighted that are sort of these odd pieces that are being paid a little bit too much and don't necessarily fit our playing style. And it just seems like we might be stuck with them for the near term at least, and it'll be hard to get them off the roster. Obviously, Gresso was Tata's decision, Freire was Tata's decision, but Christoph's going to be one of those that you're going to have to try and integrate despite not having an immediate place on this roster. Yeah, overall, an interesting perspective into how things have worked out and how this roster has been constructed, because without knowing these details, you tend to take certain things for granted. So now it puts a lot of perspective on why Julian Gresso has been playing so many minutes in so many games. Obviously, that's not entirely the reason, but at least a part of the reason of why he's playing so many games. And I guess Christoph is just a backup center back who's been paid a lot more. And then Freire, we recognize that he wasn't the first choice, but we had to bring somebody in.
Yeah, and again, I just want to separate Freire and Julian Gressel because that was a decision made by Tata Martino to bring those two players in. So Christoph is sort of a leftover from, previous regime, and that's how it goes sometimes. But anyways, there was another interesting thing, and this was, to me, the first thing I noticed. Inter Miami's roster is not as full as we thought it was. The MLS roster rules indicate that you can loan one player from your first team to your second team, and then they just don't count against your roster. And somehow Inter Miami is doing that with 4 players. As you can see at the bottom, this is the off the roster unavailable section. It's Israel Boatwright, Tyler Hall, Santi Morales, and Felipe Valencia. I have no idea how they're doing this. Honestly, I really don't. I thought maybe they had to release Felipe Valencia just because he hasn't been available and healthy, and this is the last year of his contract. So I thought that's what I was speculating that that's what they did, and yet here we find out they've actually somehow loaned 4 players from their A team to their B team. First off, 4 players that we're not going to see this year: Boatwright, Hall, Morales, Valencia. Secondly, though, and the more interesting aspect to this is we have, by my count, 2 roster slots available for the current roster. I count 21 senior players on the senior team roster, but Emerson Rodriguez out on loan and Facu Farias on the season-ending injury list brings that number down to 19, which means Inter Miami has roster flexibility moving forward. And maybe I should point out that neither Matthias Rojas nor Chelo Wiegand are TAM level players, and both DeAndre Yedlin and Sean Moto were TAM level players. And by moving those 2 out and by bringing the 2 players we did in, we still have financial flexibility as well. So both roster and financial flexibility moving forward, a beautiful thing to have for a team like Inter Miami, who we thought maybe was maxing out everything possible.
Just goes to show that I think Matthias Rojas has already paid for himself with the 2 goal contributions that he had in that game against New York Red Bulls, hasn't he? That is a cheap acquisition, and I am very surprised that he's not one of the TAM players, because I honestly thought that he would be. I wonder why it took them so long to get him on board, given that we already had the space. So maybe they were already making some of the moves that they did towards the end. The off roster, they were probably trying to work something out, but it's an interesting insight. But yeah, I'm surprised Matthias Rojas is not one of those expensive players. And Chelo Wiegand, we were going to say, I think our discussion about Chelo Wiegand was always going to be dependent on how much we've paid for him, because given how expensive Yedlin was. So I think in the grand scheme of things, for me, that's a really good swap in terms of sending Yedlin out, getting a lot of roster flexibility, and then bringing someone like Chelo Wiegand in, who potentially could be an upgrade on him, and then have those finances available So I think those two are really, really smart moves. And we obviously criticized the previous three, but I think these two have been a fantastic, fantastic acquisition from Chris Henderson and Tata Martino.
Okay, let's get into the fun and interesting and juicy stuff. We have 3 designated players right now, and those are Busquets, Messi, and Leo Campana. And that's because there was a rule in MLS that if you used all 3 of your DP spots on players that are of the level of Messi and Busquets, you could only use one U22 initiative spot. And because we had multiple players for those 3 U22 initiative spots, we had to make sure one of our DPs was under that threshold. And that's why Leo Campana got that nod. But Leo Campana can be bought down to just being a normal TAM player and not count as a designated player. Because last month, the MLS announced that they were changing the rules at the beginning of the summer transfer window to disassociate those 2 rules, the DP and the U22 DP rules. And so that means that Inter Miami can now have 3 full senior DPs along the lines of, whoever fun name you want to throw out there, Neymar or Antoine Griezmann.
Cristiano Ronaldo.
Cristiano Ronaldo. But in theory, that could happen now, right? Inter Miami could go out and spend whatever it took to bring Cristiano Ronaldo to Inter Miami. And we have a roster slot available. And we just learned that they have some allocation money available that they might be able to buy down Leo Campana under the TAM threshold. And so there's a very real, and in fact, I would say incredibly likely chance that Inter Miami is going to go out and sign another DP this summer. You want to start speculating on who that might be?
Here's what I'm going to say, though.
Before we say names, let's talk about positional needs and what might be good for this team.
Yeah. Before we even throw names out, I think there's going to be two big names. They might actually sell Leo Campana. I know he's a future prospect. He's young, but
yeah, hold on. Let me stop you for a second. I don't want to speculate too much on who might leave, just because there's no benefit to speculating on Campana.
Let me have my fun, man. I was going to build it up, but I get what you mean. So yeah, I would have expected at least 2 big names to come in. That being said, I think in terms of positional requirements, the defense stands out, right? For sure. We need a big person in the center back role. And by big person, I mean like a superstar in that role, because that's an area that we're really, really struggling.
You know what I think would be even more important than a center back? A center back that could also play right back. Because we only have one right back, and he's, Cello's solid, and I think we've liked what we've seen so far, but he's not a superstar. And so if you could get a center back that could be a center back 1, but that can also be your depth right back when you need Cello to get a rest, or when if he gets a suspension or whatever, and no jinxing anything here, but that would be, to me, like the ideal use of one last spot. Do you agree, or you think just a pure center back would be great?
In an ideal world, I would completely agree with you, because having that flexibility, especially that we don't have a backup in our right back position, would be phenomenal. Imagine someone like a Jurriën Timber in this Inter Miami side, right? Being able to play that right back position, being able to play that center back position, and does both jobs equally well. So yeah, for me, I think it's going to be really, really important to at least fill the center back position. And then if a right back can do the center back job, I think that would be the perfect acquisition for me. But I think the center back position needs to be addressed first, and then the right back position.
Okay, I want to answer this question from Rasa, because I did say I would answer the questions. And so again, if you guys have any roster rule questions, just throw them in the chat, because I know this is complicated stuff. But Rasa asks, I don't get to buy Campana off. You guys mean to buy his contract, meaning buying down him will cost $100,000. I need to give the player $100,000 to buy his contract. It's not what I mean. In MLS, there is a rule or a general pot called allocation money. and this is fake money, but you can use it to make your players fit the roster rules. So if you have a player that is making $1 million a year in his salary, and the DP threshold is 680,000, you can spend 320,000 of your allocation money, which again is not real money, it's just allocation money, and that's what TAM stands for, targeted allocation money. You can use that to buy him under the $680,000 threshold, and then he's no longer considered a DP. For Campana, I think his total cap charge is like 1.1, 1.2 million. So you would need about 500,000, give or take, to buy him under the DP threshold. And then what that would do, you need 500,000 allocation money. What that would do is allow you to have another free and open DP spot, which would allow you to, buy whoever you want for virtually unlimited resources. Inter Miami's pool of allocation money is given based on where they finished in the standings last year. Every team gets a certain amount. They get some for qualifying for CONCACAF Champions Cup, and they've traded for some, right? They traded a draft pick for some allocation money. They traded Chris McVeigh, a couple moves like that. Same with Kamal Miller. And that's how they got as much allocation money as they have. And if they still have enough money to buy down Campana, then that will free up that spot without having to lose Leo Campana. I hope that made sense. And if it doesn't, I apologize, and I'll try and be more clear. But that's what we mean when we talk about buying down Leo Campana. You can keep him as a player, and you don't have to pay him anything more. That's just this fake MLS allocation money that the league uses to try and keep rosters fair and to give teams a little bit more flexibility when building their rosters. Inter Miami, I think, has enough allocation money to do that. And so that would mean they can bring in another DP in the summer. And because MLS just changed their rules last month for this summer, you can now use that third DP spot on an unlimited player, whereas before you couldn't without losing the U22 initiative players. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think Luis Suarez is a good example of that, right? So he would generally have been paid much more than the salary cap, which I think he is being paid, but he still doesn't count as a designated player because we use TAM allocation money to bring him down to the cap limit. It's slightly complicated. It took me a while to understand. I'm still not sure if I completely understand the processes, but hopefully we were able to explain it a little bit more clearly.
Okay, so a center back, I agree. That's who I would bring in. Second question. What is Inter Miami going to do? Like we just mentioned, they believed in Nico Freire when they brought him in. They're paying him substantial money. And Aviles is not a guy they're going to bench, right? They paid $7 million for him as a transfer fee. He's one of the U22s, and he's going to be the most experienced center back as far as Inter Miami is concerned. Probably already is. So it feels like they believe in those two, and they've been playing them every time they're healthy, right? So what do you think Inter Miami is going to do with that third DP spot?
Inter Miami is going to do what Lionel Messi wants to do. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be one of the players, the big name superstars who are going to be brought in, because let's be honest, it's Lionel Messi's swan song, right? He wants to have as much firepower to play alongside him as possible. So I think Inter Miami is going to spend a lot of the focus in trying to get one of the big players that we're going to talk about. And I think it's going to be shoring up the front three or the midfield position.
Okay. But now you're not taking Lionel Messi off the field, right? Obviously. You're not going to use it on a striker, right? Because you're not, you have Luis Suarez, unless maybe there's some injury or something, but, no alien abductions, hopefully. And then at left wing, you now have Robert Taylor and Matias Rojas, who I think are two players you feel good about to the point where you probably don't need to bring in a superstar there. They could, of course. And then in the midfield, you have like 1,000 good high quality options. So I don't know if it makes sense to use it there either. You're not going to use it as a left back. Hopefully they don't use it for a goalkeeper. If they could bring in that center back, right back partnership, to me, that makes the most sense. But you just said, what Lionel Messi wants to do or what that group wants to do, right? Who do you think that could be? And let's have a little bit of fun now.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Uh-oh. I think we may have just lost YouTube. Uh-oh. Okay, so last question. Do they bring in a DP for the last 6 months of this season, or do they bring in a DP for the next year and a half, which is the rest of Messi's contract? Final question.
I think they bring in a DP for the rest of the year because to Messi's year, because I don't think they're going to bring it just for the end of the season, right? Again, it depends on who's coming in. So it really depends on the kind of player that they bring in to determine how long he's going to actually be given an opportunity, whether it's for this end of the season or whether it's for the rest of the, Messi's remaining reign. The reason I say that is you don't bring in someone like a Griezmann for just 6 months, right? He still has plenty to give. Similarly with Neymar, I think you don't just bring him for 6 months. If it's someone like Luka Modric, maybe. So I think it depends on who they bring in and what that name looks like and how much he has left to give to this team.
Solid. I have 2 names that I came with that I'm interested in. But before I give those, I want to hear your thoughts on some interesting names that we can have fun speculating on.
All right. Can I finally go wild, right?
Yes.
You've held me back for this long. Let me do my thing now. Okay, so obviously we've got Angel Di Maria, who's the connection's really heating up. We're hearing a lot about them finally bringing him on. There you go. AZ Rebellion agrees with me. Potentially bringing in Di Maria. Luka Modric is another one. I'm not sure what his status is with Real Madrid, and I'm not sure whether he wants to play with Lionel Messi or not. But that's another one that I'm really interested in because he's one of those players who everyone thinks is edging towards the end of his career, but I think he still has a little bit to give to this team. I think he can still do a really good job in that midfield. Imagine a Modric and Busquets combination. They're not going to run. They're just going to sit in the midfield, control the ball, pass it in between themselves, and then just play the most amazing passes to Luis Suarez and Lionel Messi. But that's a lot of midfielders, and that means sacrificing some of our young midfielders. I think for me, the likeliest that we could potentially go with, and that's 2. I think a centre back, and that for me is Sergio Ramos and or Neymar. I think Neymar is going to be the most likely if he's willing to play in the MLS. There are a lot of names.
I don't think Neymar. I think there's a 0% chance Neymar comes this summer.
Really?
And I'll tell you why. The Saudi league spent a lot of money to bring him on, and he tore his ACL like right away. So I don't think they'd be willing to let him go. He's under contract until the following summer, and I could absolutely see it next summer. But I don't think they're going to be willing to let him go because they haven't gotten much of him. And, they brought in all these star players to give their fans and try and build their reputation and all that stuff. You said a lot of names. And I guess, do you think any of them actually make sense? And do you think they're likely?
The most sense that makes for me is Sergio Ramos or someone who can play centre back.
One name we have heard is Nacho from Real Madrid, and I think he can play as a fullback as well. So he does fit the criteria that I said. He doesn't have the obvious connection to the Barca boys like some of the, or at least that I know of, like some of the other names we talked about, right? Obviously, Sergio Ramos, Angel Di Maria have played with Messi in the past at PSG or with Argentina. So I don't know. You can see it, right? I have 2 names for you. one I think is totally unrealistic, and I found like the criteria that I'm looking for, and maybe I'll go with that one first, that I would like to see in an MLS, in this player, even if this specific player is not the right choice. And I'll be honest, I'm just going off of like some basic scouting reports I've seen of him. I don't actually know how good he is as a player. I haven't seen him much. But one name I saw was Kevin McAllister, who is a center back in Belgium. He's Argentine. He's the brother of Liverpool's Alexis McAllister. He can play center back. He can play as a fullback. He's like 26, 25, something like that. So he's a prime age player. He's a guy you'd have to spend $5 million transfer fee on, but he has that Argentine connection. He would, I would be shocked if he wouldn't be willing to come to play with Messi. And then he's sort of a prime age player that you could use for a while. That's the first name. And I think it's not him specifically. It's just he's a player from Argentina playing in Europe. That's a prime age player that targets the thing you really need, which is a versatile defender. Maybe that's how we should describe it from here. That's the first name. And maybe he's not the right player. Maybe there's a much better option. I'm sure there is. I just kind of found him in 5 minutes of looking through my criteria. But does that make sense to you? Targeting someone who has the criteria I just described, instead of going for one of Messi's friends who's a big name.
Okay, let's be realistic, right? Let's be more grounded in this approach and this analysis. I think having one of these superstar players come in that I named would be fantastic for the brand. It'd be really great on paper. It'd be really good to have them play alongside Messi. But it doesn't make sense for this squad, does it? Unless it's someone like a Sergio Ramos or a centre-back that comes in. It doesn't really make sense because we've got a lot of positional depth in practically every single corner of the field. If you bring in a midfielder, you're potentially sacrificing the development of someone like Redondo or Kremaski. If you bring in a forward, why did we bring in Matthias Rojas? Robert Taylor might be sacrificed. So there's a lot of speculation about these big names coming in, but it's at the danger of actually disrupting the progress that this team has been making, the chemistry that's been building up. And I think just the general makeup of this roster might get really disturbed by bringing in someone of this massive value and name. So for me, I think what you just mentioned, Kevin McAllister, a player of his ilk, is the perfect answer to what this team needs. We don't have a right back option, right? With Israel Boatwright put into the second team, we don't have a backup right back option. If he can play both right back and center back, it'd be phenomenal to cover that particular area of the pitch.
Yeah, to me that's, and again, I've never seen him play, 90 minutes, so I don't know how good he really is.
But saying that the type of player that he is, the versatility that someone can play in those two positions is what we need, and someone who's young as well.
To me, the best way you can use a DP spot is on Lionel Messi. And the second best way you can use a DP spot is on Joseph Paintsil. And Paintsil is 25, 26, entering his prime, very athletic, very talented, coming from a league where he has pedigree. He came from Belgium and from Genk, which has pedigree. He's played at a good level. It's not the top 5 leagues, and it's going to be hard to convince players to come from the top 5 leagues that are at that age. But it's still a very high quality where you can expect them to come in and make an immediate impact. So that's what I was thinking. And whether it's, Portugal or Belgium or the Netherlands or, the English champion, maybe not the championship, but something like that. Go for a player that's 25 and is ready to come in and make an immediate impact, more so than go for a guy that's 35 that
brand value
is incredibly talented, because all the guys we mentioned are very talented, but this is a very athletic league. And we've seen that, you have to play defense, right? You have to have, well, maybe not if you score 6 goals. So maybe what I'm saying is silly, but
we do have an aging squad. We do have some players who need, I'm not saying they need to be carried, but physically they're not at the peak of their athleticism. So we do need to surround them with players who are able to account for that lack of athleticism. And I completely agree with you. Having someone who's a little bit more athletic in that center back role is going to be really, really interesting.
Okay, so here's my other name, which I also think is marginally realistic, and we haven't heard it at all. At least I haven't heard it at all by anyone speculating, and that's Rafael Varane. He is also a player that is a big name. He's about 10 years younger than Sergio Ramos. He's world-class, like caliber player, that kind of thing, right? He does play center back. He's big, he's tall, so he's going to be good in the air. He solves that problem that you really wanted when you brought in Nico Freire. He is good on the ball. He can play a high line. He can do all those things. He is a bit injury prone, so, take that for what it's worth. But he's also a free agent this summer, meaning we wouldn't have to spend a transfer fee on him. And like Luka Modric, like Nacho, like some of the Real Madrid guys we've seen connected to us, he was a Real Madrid player, and he's never played with Messi, but neither have a lot of these guys, right? So that's the other name that I think is at least realistic that we haven't heard mentioned at all, as far as that big name sort of superstar type player. And he's a lot younger than a lot of the guys we've talked about. And I got that name just by looking at big center backs from Europe that are running out of their contracts. So, who knows?
Yeah, for some of our listeners, I just want to point out that Sir Octi in the chat has volunteered himself to be ready and available for Tata Martino to make an immediate impact in the centre-back role. So, Octi, send us some of your training clips and maybe we can get a word out to Tata Martino. But in all seriousness, coming back to Rafa Varane, there are two things why I don't think he's going to come in. First, I think he's too injury prone. Obviously, for Manchester United, I don't know the statistics of how many games he's played. When he's played, he's really, really good. I think he's still world class. He would really fit into this Inter Miami team perfectly, but he's too injury prone, and I don't think it makes sense for us to sign him, given the fact that he may miss more of the season than actually. Maybe if you sign him for a 6-month contract, that might be a thing.
So this is the thing that I mentioned this to you and I didn't really answer it myself. If we sign a player that's 25, 26, I'm happy to give them a long you give them a long contract. If we're signing Di Maria or Sergio Ramos or whatever, I want it to be a 6-month contract until December and then go from there, because I just don't want to give that player a 1.5-year contract if they haven't played in the MLS and they don't know, especially a defender. You got to be athletic, and a player like that is volatile in terms of their athleticism. So, those are some thoughts. And listen, I'd rather see the younger player. I'd rather see a 25-year-old come in, honestly.
And just the second point on Rafa Varane, he's mentioned quite publicly that he would either end his career at Manchester United or RC Lens. And the likelihood is that he's going to go back to his childhood club. Obviously, I don't think Manchester United has any plans to keep him on for another year. But I think it's going to come down to what his personal decision is. And we might just end up seeing him play in the French league and not in the MLS. But definitely a good shout, man. Bring me someone like a Lindelof and I'll be great. I'll be quite happy. I think he'd be a good acquisition. I don't think he's going to come to Inter Miami, but yeah, someone of that makeup would be really interesting.
If they could bring, I understand that Victor Lindelof is not a huge superstar type name, but he would still be immediately the best center back.
He'd be the best center back in the MLS, easily. Yeah.
So any player like that who is under 30 and playing at a club like that, even if they're the third choice center back or whatever, yes, bring them, please.
And I do think Lindelof can actually play in the fullback role. Of course, he can't do the same role in the Premier League because that's a completely different league. But I think in the MLS, he can definitely do a job there. So bring him in.
Yeah. And listen, there's 30 center backs that are of the ilk of Victor Lindelof in Europe. And if they could get one of those, I would be ecstatic.
And yeah, just to that point, I want to make sure the listeners understand we're not saying bring in Victor Lindelof. We're just saying someone like that makeup of a player would be fantastic to have on our team.
Okay. That was the fun part. I have another topic regarding this roster that I thought was interesting to bring up. And if you go look at that fourth column in this table, you see the contract through number, and you see a lot of 2024s in that column. And to me, that means that there is a ton of roster flexibility for not just this season, but next season as well. And I want to applaud Chris Henderson for making this possible, because this has more to do with him than Tata Martino. But Cello, we could bring him back, but we don't have to. Robert Taylor, same thing. Luis Suarez, same thing. Ryan Saylor, easy to move on. Matias Rojas, easy to move on. Robbie Robinson's probably not going to be back regardless. But Franco Negri, Sergei Kristoff, Nico
Robbie
Freire.
Robinson got abducted by the aliens. That was the one that we were talking about.
Yeah, probably. So you're talking about your 20-man roster. You can flip over 7, 8 guys relatively easily and bring in new players next season that are of higher quality and that you may be able to get for cheaper deals just because they want to play with Lionel Messi.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. This is a smart roster construction in terms of how much time we've given these players, and there's a flexibility in keeping some of these players on, but if they don't perform, so for instance, if Matias Rojas turns out to be not a great signing in the near future, Lord knows I think he's going to be great for us, but if in case it doesn't work out, you can move him on next year.
Yeah, but you can move him on in order to bring on Neymar and
exactly.
feel good about it.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of room and flexibility for us to play around. I know a lot of the teams, especially in Europe, what they do nowadays is to amortize some of the costs of paying these players. They give them very long contracts, and that can be very detrimental in terms of the long-term future of the club. So to have that stability and that flexibility going forward is really, really important. And it just keeps things really exciting and fresh because it wants players to play well. It wants players to show what they're capable of so that they get signed on for another year. And then if they don't perform, there's a lot of room to bring in some of the bigger names because, let's be honest, Inter Miami is slowly and steadily becoming a really attractive destination for a lot of these young players as well as some of the older players. So for me, I think this is a really, really good, smart decision-making from Chris Henderson and his team.
Yeah, Inter Miami has seemingly turned over half the roster every single season since they came into the league. So at some point, you don't love the lack of consistency, especially when the CONCACAF Champions Cup is a early season tournament. You know, personally, I would love to see there be a group stage in that tournament and then a knockout stage in the second half of the season. But that's not where we're at right now. So no point in speculating on that. So you'd like to see some consistency going into the season. But again, if you can upgrade your roster talent-wise, you'd love to do that. And there's a whole host of names that are going to be available next winter. But the other reason is if a player is under contract or you can opt out of the contract at the end of the season, it makes it more attractive for other MLS teams to say, we'll take a flyer on that guy knowing we have contract flexibility moving forward. And so if you're another MLS team, a guy like Franco Negri, again, I don't want to speculate too much. There's 8 guys on this roster that other teams would be interested in on the trade deadline that Inter Miami might be willing to let go, knowing that they're only committed to the next 6 months or even, at that point, 3 months. And that can give you the roster space or flexibility you need to bring in not just one DP who we were just talking about a DP, but a lot of players, right? They could bring in another right back. They could bring in another center back. They could bring in a backup striker or a backup right winger or, whatever. A guy like Matias Rojas could come out of nowhere. And because the winter is not a great time to pluck players from Europe, the summer is, and having that flexibility to move players off the roster in order to bring in players from Europe who fit what you're trying to do a little bit better, you're opening up the potential pool of incoming players to a lot larger selection and a selection that has more talent, right? So.
Yeah, and I will say this, that in the upcoming summer, there is a danger that some of the fan favorites actually get let go just to bring in some other names. So That's something that we're going to have to watch out for, definitely.
Listen, there's not been a transfer window where I haven't cried a little bit based on who's gone from this Inter Miami team, other than maybe last summer. Last summer was pretty fun.
If Robert Taylor goes, I will be on silent duty for at least 2 weeks.
We're cutting that out of the podcast. Anything else about this? I mean, we see that we have 5 U22 initiative players, so that's something we're going to have to fix in the offseason. And Emerson Rodriguez may come back in the summer, at least temporarily. So again, that might be a problem we have to work on in the summer. But other than that, I mean, I think we covered all the interesting talking points, right?
Yeah, we've got a deep roster, and hopefully at some point we get to see quite a few of these players play because we're getting some of them back from injury. But you were going to say something?
Yes. One other thing I wanted to mention, there used to be a rule in MLS, I believe, that you could only have 11 international roster slots, at least for the American teams. And that is no longer the case. So Inter Miami, they only have 11 right now, but they could go out and acquire another one if they felt the need to bring in another international player without moving one. I think that's all I have. I did want to spend 5 minutes talking about the Montreal game just to give some early thoughts, but there might be some questions in the chat that you kind of wanted to go back to.
Yeah, there are just few suggestions about who we should sign, and I like some of these ideas thrown out. Phil Coutinho, interesting name. I'm not sure if he's the one who's going to come in. Thiago Silva, he's already signed for Fluminense or Fluminense. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but he's already signed in Brazil. Sergio Roberto, I think there's talks of him signing on for Barca and staying there. Not sure if he's linked to Inter Miami yet. Concretely, Harry Maguire. I highly doubt Harry Maguire is going to come in. I'm sure this was
that's not going to happen. But again, he would be probably the best center back in MLS immediately.
Yeah, 100%. He's probably going to get rinsed by Painsil in one of the games. he gets rinsed by Painsil in a couple of games, but you know what? Out of at least 30 games that we play, he's going to be good in 28 of them. So, but again, not going to happen. I know that was a bit of a jest, but just to clarify. And then big question, will Suarez stick around for another year? What do you think?
Can I not talk about Suarez and talk about Messi instead?
Yeah, sure.
Messi signed a 2.5-year contract with Inter Miami, so he's going to be here through next season. But I think there's every chance that he stays here until he retires. And that it could be at the end of next season, but I don't know if there's any reason to believe that he's going to go to a different club after this. I know people would fantasize and romanticize about him going to somewhere in Argentina or back to Barcelona, but I think probably the most likely scenario is that he stays at Inter Miami until the end of his career. And then the same with Luis Suarez. I think probably this is going to be the last club, and so if he wants to keep playing another year, he will.
Yeah, I do think as sad as it sounds, Lionel Messi's career is coming towards its end. I think it's the final swan song. I think he's going to play for a couple of years.
That's not what I'm saying. I think he could play another 4 or 5 years. I'm just saying.
I think he could. I don't think he wants to.
I think they will all be at Inter Miami. I think that's the most likely scenario.
Let's just leave it there.
Get out of the swamp.
We don't want to. We don't want to go into the pressure and just think.
Well, now we have to talk about Montreal because we can't end the podcast on that.
Give me a 7-2 and I'll be happy.
Yeah. Okay, so we play Montreal this weekend. We play Orlando City in the midweek. We play, I believe, DC United at home next weekend. This game at Saputo Stadium in Canada. Give me your initial thoughts.
Very much winnable by a lot. I think the first game that we lost was an absolute horror show because we should have won that game, even though we didn't have Messi. Did Suarez play that game against Montreal?
He did.
I believe he did, and I believe he scored, but I think we should have won that game. We had them better chances. We were the better team overall. So this is going to be another grudge match, another revenge game, and hopefully this time we can actually dispatch them because we're better than them, and that's just how it is. So we're going to go into a lot more detail when we do our pre-game show this weekend, but initial thoughts, this is a game that we have to win.
Do you think we're going to see rotation because we have arguably a
week.
more important midweek game. Orlando City's the rival, so that's more important, right? Do you think we'll see some rotation this weekend, or do you think we'll get rotation that, or do you think we'll get rotation the following weekend?
I think we're going to get a couple of rotations. I think Matas Rojas is going to start just by virtue of how well he played.
Right? Has to
start. We may even see, if Christoph is healthy, we may even see him come off the bench for a little bit. I think we're going to see a couple of.
Oh, no. Aviles is suspended for this game, so Christoph's almost guaranteed to start.
Yeah, so there you go. We're going to see a few fresh faces come in, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's going to be good to have some of them back and good to see some of the players start who might not have. I would love to see Benjamin Kramaski. Is he going to drop Gressel for this game? I don't know, but I think this is the perfect opportunity to give Kramaski the first start of this season, and I think he would definitely make a difference. But we'll see. I expect a few players to be rested for the next game.
Matías Rojas, you think he starts in the midfield, or you think he starts at left wing?
I think he starts in left wing. Give Robert Taylor a little bit of a breather because he is coming back from injury, remember? So
yeah. And then in the midfield, you think we're going to get the same three: Ruiz, Gressel, Busquets, or you think we'll get Kramaski? You think we'll get?
I think we get Kramaski, Gressel, Busquets.
I think that makes sense. And lastly, Campana, Suarez. You think? I mean, Campana's going to start one of these three games, right? It's not. And I don't know. Maybe the DC United at home game makes more sense, but it feels like there's a chance we get Campana in this game, so that Suarez can go.
Rest.
Orlando City and DC United. Yeah, like I said, Aviles is suspended because of yellow card accumulation. Sorry, I didn't mention that. But anything else, man? They're without Kokoro, I think. They're without Joseph Martinez. They have Bryce Duke and Lasser, so it'll be fun to see those guys. But other than that, this doesn't feel like a very good team. They're going to be well structured, but they're lacking talent. I do like their coach a lot, but it just feels like even on the road, it should be a game we can win, 3-0 like that.
Yeah. Listen, we're inevitably going to concede that first goal in the first 10 minutes, maybe even a couple, but then we just wake up in the second half and take that win because we need to win this game. Imagine Montreal having a double over us this season. That's actually embarrassing. So even though we've really played well against New York Red Bulls and we dispatched them the way we wanted to, this is still a game that if we lose, it could be potentially embarrassing, at least for a little bit. So for me, a win is the only way out. No draw, no loss. I think we have to come out on top here.
Yeah, and listen, it's a revenge game. We lost them at home. We've won 4 in a row. We're feeling good. We're top of the table. We got to go on a run with Messi now that, and by the way, Messi's on fire. 3 points mandatory. Yeah. Okay, so thank you guys for watching. We'll be back for the pregame show as always. We do it in the hour before kickoff, so 6:30 Eastern time on Saturday right here on YouTube. Please join us. It's always a lot of fun. And then we'll be back with a postgame show and all that good stuff. But if you learned anything from this episode, it's that we're going to sign Griezmann, Neymar, and Sergio Ramos this summer. And other than that, it was a lot of fun, and we'll see you guys next time.